Hello. We're going to be talking about fascism for a little bit. We hear the word fascism a lot these days. This guy's a fascist, that girl's a fascist, that's fascism, don't want to be a fascist. Now the word itself, fascism, it sounds kind of funny, right? It says, what is it? I don't know. I never really zoomed in on it, but it's supposed to sound funny because it was a derogatory name given to corporatism by the Allies in order to mock it. Now, fascism itself comes from the word fascis, which was a symbol used by Mussolini in Italy. It's got an axe with sticks wrapped around it, and it was the symbol that it was the manner in which the Romans would send messages back and forth, official messages. Now, the word fascism began to be used in the 1930s, pretty much. It was used as part of the propaganda work of the United States and England, which during the 1930s, while struggling to recover from the Great Depression, was combining socialism with newly introduced dictatorial powers in the United States for the president, and that was President Roosevelt. A similar situation there was being carried out in the United Kingdom, which had expanded the role of prime minister far beyond its original intent. And these powers failed the first adopters of these powers as they signed agreements of non-aggression with Italy and Germany as a result of their feelings, the feelings of superiority by the British Empire and the United States, their feelings of superiority over the countries that had lost so much because of World War I. France was mixed up in there too. The British Empire had empresses and emperors, but they were, kings and queens. The empire was a large pyramid scheme with the English at the top of a barely disguised system based on race, fraud, and military violence. They simply did not understand what was going on just across the water in Europe and made fun of it and mislabeled the corporatism as fascism because they had corporations as well and they didn't want to confuse things. They had to make a little delineation there. Now, as the World War II loomed and then began international barriers began to fall between the United States and the British Empire. The propaganda became more pointed. It also became obvious that fascism was not just based on personality, on a personality cult, but it was so strong because the nations that practiced ran their governments by the consent of the corporate leaders, major landholders, and the banks. The military dictators in Germany and Italy were both servants of the prevailing corporate structure and banking industry. They were carrying out their edicts. Corporatism is a capitalist form of society that is ruled by nationalism, formed from a preference for domestic producers who are united together as separate units of the government. So you've got people who make food, people who make drinks, people who make steel, people who make coal. They all work together as in their own national interest. The military, they do not serve the government. They do not serve the government. The main corporation is the national government. All the industries function under the national government as distinct affiliates. They may be assigned some duty, you got to increase more steel, you got to make some more aluminum, but essentially there are distinct affiliates and the rest of the group will come to their aid if necessary. All decisions regarding raw materials, usage, pricing, general production, that is what is needed, and other such things are centrally planned, so all these businesses and industries are always busy. And if they're falling off on something, say they're not making enough domestically in the steel industry, then they'll cut imports of steel from other places so the domestic steel industry can come back up, because the domestic national economy is number one in corporatism. In a country run under corporatism, which was referred to as fascism, the nation is a giant corporation. It competes against other corporations like it, other nations, and in the case of the 1930s, those other corporations included the United States, which due to various reasons was weakening at the time through the Great Depression. Everything was just going down. It was breaking up. The states were gaining more power, and things were falling to pieces. And the British Empire was being finally exposed as a facade, and the French Empire, which had been turned into a piratical extracting empire, a group of businesses. The Japanese Empire, which was turning out to be warlike. The Soviet Union, which was a forced conglomeration of poverty-stricken nations and wild lands, and many smaller countries to extract their materials to power the western portion of the Soviet Union, led by Russia. The blood and horrors that took place in the countries that were ruled by corporatism were heinous. All of them were doing nasty things. In the early 20th century right now, the world's governments are dominated by nations practicing corporatism. Russia is an oligarchy. A small number of rich people run the nation using corporatism to enable cooperation over a vast area. Communist China is no longer communist, but is a police state that practices corporatism, and they shut down anybody that gets a little out. They're getting a little too powerful. In that case, it's a little bit flipped. If the particular sector is getting a little too powerful, they get rid of the corporate head and they bring it back down, and so it can serve the general good. Now, Japan has never relinquished corporatism, and neither has Korea. The United States, where they have groups of companies that work together. This also occurs in Mexico. The United States has adopted corporatism recently under the new name America First, and has been under the control of corporatists since shortly after the end of World War II. Just done. The 1950s saw a concentration of power in individual corporations, which immediately began to form again into groups, right? They had been the trust had been broken up at the beginning of the 20th century. But in the 1950s, everything's destroyed. We got to fix everything in the world. We have to fulfill the Marshall Plan. And they started making relationships again that were unfair and business practices in general. And the reason was to power the central nationalist ideal in the United States of America, while also spreading out into the world to extract all the business that was going on out there, all the wealth. Now, every war since the Korean War has been fought for profit and has been started and stopped by the corporatist faction. Making good money? Go ahead, finish it up. Not making good money? Oh, stop, get out of there. That's it. The Democratic and Republican parties right now are the local representatives of the corporatist government from their regions. The United Kingdom, now stripped of its possessions, possessions, I got to do the quotes there, and empire, is a standalone corporatist nation. The main participant in the United Kingdom is England, which still maintains control over Scotland, Wales, Cornwall, and North Ireland, and uses them to support the structure that essentially only serves the English while exploiting their immediate neighbors. Brexit was an expression of the intention of England to remain a nation practicing corporatism alone. They also operate within the United Kingdom, where they operate banks and investment vehicles and all sorts of finances and cash from many of their ex-colonies and many of their ex-territories and possessions. They still maintain the finances. And many of those satellite countries still maintain colonial laws, so it's really quite strange. So France remains a corporatist nation, as does Germany, which ceased operating as one for less than 2 years following World War II, when the United States directed it. And when Germany ceased operating as one for less than 2 years, they said, you can't do that anymore. When the United States directed it, and most of the other nations in Europe, to reform themselves into the same union that had been forced, that had been attempted by force by German and Italian aggression, that you were told to all cooperate with one another. And they broke up into small countries, but as we can see, the eventual resolution of all that is the European Union, as they become one nation again. And they are also based on corporatism, but they're still got those little pockets where France prefers French stuff, Germany prefers German stuff, and then you got Denmark and Holland and all the other ones still concentrating on themselves, but beginning to understand that if they work as a group in the European Union, they can dominate the other, they can take care of themselves more efficiently and dominate others in the world. So there's a resurgence of a little problem starting here. Now, the smaller or less rich countries around the world either practice some form of corporatism, either by force, or they were directed to, they had no other choice, or are closely aligned to one, and sometimes more than one, of the larger and more organized nations practicing corporatism. Now, these agreements and partnerships have formed charters and treaties like NAFTA and others like it, which align the corporate economies of the participants and partners so as to strengthen themselves and defeat their competitors. Now, at this time, any nation that fields an army or attempts to claim additional territory through warfare or corruption in the early 21st century world of corporatism is easily identified as a loser. If you got to send the army out and you got to fight, well, something's going wrong. You can't physically take it, you can't physically force it outside. The current losers include Russia, China, Sudan, El Salvador, Venezuela, and Myanmar. These are just a few examples. There's only like 20 or 30 of them that you could clearly see that they're totally dysfunctional. The rest of them are functional from the viewpoint of corporatism, but not from, they're not empathetic, they're not sympathetic, they're not kind to their people, and that's a world problem. Now, calling corporatism by the name of fascism is funny, right? You can't get a feeling on what's going on there. And it is that way because corporatism isn't funny any way you look at it. Thank you.